As the sun came up, I just saw how like breathtakingly beautiful our planet Earth is. Almost like someone just took the most brilliant like blue paint and just painted it on a mirror, right in front of your face, and it was just absolutely breathtaking. My brother used to say, I don't know if he says this any longer, but at least he used to say that going to Mars is not about rocket science; it's about political science.
Well, you guys know I'm a real space geek, so whenever I have the opportunity to have guests on that, expand my knowledge of human spaceflight and get into the future of mankind being a multiplanetary species and all that, I'm going to jump at that opportunity. And today is a real treat for you guys as listeners and for me personally as a space geek. And that is, we're going to introduce you to a NASA astronaut, a former NASA astronaut. He spent over 500 days in space, 520 days in space to be exact. One stint with 340 days. He commanded Space Shuttle Discovery STS-103, which was a Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission in December 1999, and that was his only mission as commander. But he also flew on pilot of STS-118 in 2007. Scott Kelly, welcome to the Futurists.
Thanks, Brett. Unfortunately, the first thing I have to do is
Correct me.
your introduction. I was
Please.
the pilot, not the commander on STS-103,
Okay.
which was, you were accurate. It was on Hubble. I mean, it was a Hubble mission. It was on Discovery, but that was my first space flight. And
Okay. So you weren't
yeah,
commander.
no, but I
Oh,
was the commander on
I got the
STS-118.
two mixed up. There you
You got
go.
the jobs mixed up there a little
All
bit.
right. We just had a couple of astronauts as we go to air this week. This week we've had a couple of astronauts returning from the space station, and there's been some controversy about them being rescued and being stranded up there and so forth. But let me ask you a slightly different question about that because we've heard it directly from the two astronauts who returned. But if you were meant to spend a few days on the space station, a couple of weeks, and instead it turned into a few months as a career astronaut, would you feel like you've been stranded, or would you be happy about the opportunity to have an extended stay?
I think I'd be happy about the fact that I was a test pilot. I was testing a brand new vehicle. And as test pilots and astronauts, we expect the unexpected. And that I could serve my country and serve NASA and my fellow crewmates in this capacity of having to stay on the space station longer than I expected.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was challenging, but the
sure.
reason we do these jobs is for the challenge.
Yeah. When you were preparing for your first shuttle mission, and obviously NASA has extensive training and so forth, but was there anything particularly in terms of the training, and then when you actually got to pilot the shuttle on that first mission and you went into space that you were surprised by, that struck you as something different?
Oh yeah, I mean the first time you fly, certainly there are things that you don't expect, like the 7 million pounds of thrust instantly through your back when the solid rocket motor's light. You don't expect that. You're pretty well trained to do the job. What makes it more challenging once you get into space is the whole environment just makes it hard to kind of focus and pay attention, especially when it's your first time and you've only been there for a short period of time. Um, the microgravity, even though it's fun and looks fun, it makes just about everything else harder to do.
Yeah.
Unless you're trying to move something very massive, or if you're trying to, let's say, get your arm into a certain position to fix something, that's certainly easier in space. Access to things is easier, but everything else is harder. Yeah, and then when you come back, you're not feeling the greatest either. The
Yeah.
things that you can't train for on Earth are the things that are surprising.
Yeah. And you hear a lot about astronauts talking about the overview effect. Some astronauts have said it's not as impactful for them, but it's a common element of conversation about being in space and seeing
Mhm.
the Earth from space for the first time. Most recently, Blue Origin sent up, or fairly recently, they sent up Captain Kirk, William Shatner, and he had a very emotional reaction to that. But you've got a job to do up there. But tell me about your, you were, I guess, sitting in the cockpit as you went into orbit.
Yeah.
As you transition into orbit and you're seeing that for the first time, is it surreal, or is the training kicking in and you're just accepting it as part of that, or is your brain like fighting with the sort of ultra reality of the moment?
Well, first of all, let me say I was just on a trip to Antarctica with Bill Shatner, William Shatner.
Oh yeah.
That guy, oh yeah, he's amazing. I mean, talk about an icon of uh, science fiction and just the whole idea of the exploration. And for his age, I mean, he's really an inspiration. Um, as far as the overview effect, yeah, I think it's something that's personal to every individual, and it probably means something a little bit different. Uh, sometimes people ask me, what does it look like to, punch a hole in the atmosphere, and when you fly through the sky, right? And I don't know what that looks like because I didn't look outside the window on the space shuttle, two missions, front seat. Just didn't occur to me to look out the window because I was compartmentalizing, focusing on my
Yeah.
job. And I can remember on my first flight, very focused. And then I guess my gaze went, and we launched it at night, so not a whole lot to look out at anyway. But um, my gaze just kind of went outside the window, and I saw something on the horizon, some light looking thing, and I didn't even. It was just like struck me. It's just so odd and unusual looking. I asked the commander of the crew, Kurt Brown, and I said to him, I go, "What the hell is that?" And he goes, "That's the sunrise." And then he said, "Oh, by the way, you'll see another one in 90 minutes."
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, 8,000 sunsets and or how many? I don't know how many I've seen. And my six, whatever 540 times 16 is, that's how many I've seen. Um, but in any case, as the sun came up, I just saw how like breathtakingly beautiful our planet Earth is. Almost like someone just took the most brilliant like blue paint and just painted it on a mirror, right in front of your face. And it was just absolutely breathtaking. Um, the thing that's, I think people are generally struck by it and why is the clarity of the blue color, how absolutely beautiful it is, but also how peaceful the planet looks from space.
Yeah.
Um, it, polluted in certain areas. You see pollution, but you don't see all the hate and and the damage we've done to the environment. You see the fragility of the environment, but you don't get the sense that there's a lot of people down there killing each other and not being kind to one another. And um, you wonder like if an alien spacecraft ever visited this planet, they'd get definitely a
Mm.
different perception of what they see as they approach versus what they find once they land. Not always a welcoming place, this planet, when you're down below, but extraordinarily beautiful and tranquil looking from space. There's a lot of water out there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we probably should have called the planet Ocean instead of planet Earth.
Earth. Yeah. Yeah.
Half of it seems like it's the Pacific Ocean. Um, and then, the connectivity between people on Earth, people are down there, and when you look at Earth from space, it doesn't seem all that big either.
Yeah.
And I think after this last pandemic we had, we see how something can happen on one side of the planet, quickly spread around the world. Yeah, so but you're right that everyone does have a different impression of that, but that's my impression.
Yeah. Professor Brian Cox, the astrophysicist out of the UK, he often suggests that we should send politicians up, not because we need to get them out of off the planet, but that the overview effect does have the potential to change people's perception of the Earth as humans' home and the fact that we're sort of one family. A little bit of
Oh,
trivia for
yeah.
you.
My
Sorry.
Russian colleague that I spent the nearly year long mission on the space station. At the time, it was the longest, not anymore. But he said, if we sent our two presidents into space, um, we could solve a whole lot of Earth's problems. His president, he meant,
Yeah,
Putin,
yeah,
because he's
yeah,
always
yeah,
the president. Ours was a few presidents ago.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. But a bit of trivia for you. In the Middle Ages, you know that we didn't have a name for the color blue. They just called it a shade of green.
Really?
So, yeah. So, a
Sure.
little bit of trivia for you. But, um, it's certainly, we've called it the pale blue dot for a while now. So,
Okay.
you get asked a lot about your experience, on the long duration space flight and recovery and so forth. But I want to sort of turn that a little bit. It's on its head today. Is when you're up there, a lot of people talked about what you missed on the Earth, and you missed having a shower. You've talked quite openly about that. You missed your family, obviously. That must have been tough. But now that you've been back, and you're on the Earth, do you find yourself at times thinking about that mission, thinking a bit about being in the space station? And are there other things that you miss about being in space today when you're back on the Earth?
Yeah, I think about it sometimes. Sometimes you'll get like a deja vu, mostly associated with like smells, oddly enough. Remember one time I was in the Harris County Jail, not because I committed a crime.
That was
Getting a
going to be my
tour.
next question. Yeah.
We went into this one jail cell with like 20 guys in it, and yeah, it was. I'm surprised we went in there. Actually, it looked kind of dangerous, but in any case, this the smell of body odor and cleaning supplies just hit me, and I felt like I was back on the space station.
Oh, really?
Uh, so yeah, occasionally you'll have like some kind of deja vu. Something will make me think about it. I don't dwell on it. I don't think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll have a dream about it, but it's kind of
Oh,
rare to remember
interesting.
those dreams. But occasionally I will. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's, something I look back on fondly. What I miss about it, to answer that question, is the people that I was there with, that I worked with. You can form an extraordinary bond with somebody when
Yeah.
you're isolated, doing something as extraordinary as that, as risky as what we do. And then the other thing I miss is the work.
Hmm.
Not really like the flying in space part and looking out the window part, but doing something that is challenging, that's complicated, but also something that has consequences for your poor performance, or the mistakes you may make, lack of focus, and the consequences can be severe, like you die, or
Yeah.
you've broken a $100 million piece of hardware, or you've ruined somebody's life work, their science, because you were the
Hmm.
person conducting that science on board the space station. So, and the amount of focus and intensity that operating in that kind of environment with those kind of consequences is incredibly rewarding, and something that I no longer experience on Earth.
That level of both complexity and competency in many ways, and the support team, massive support team you have behind. I remember, I don't know if it's in your book Endurance. I suspect so, but where you gave the account of a particular piece of machinery that gave you a lot of difficulty, which was the urine processing. Uh, uh, I guess the water processing
Yeah.
device that was seemed to be quite complex and yet fairly simple idea. Um, but what were your most memorable experiments on station?
Um, yeah, so about the hardware, yeah, there was the urine processing stuff was, you'd have to work on that. The more challenging piece of hardware was the thing that scrubbed our carbon dioxide, scrubbed the air of carbon dioxide. That thing was like, the antagonist of my book, which is
Right.
weird because it's a piece of machinery. Um, as far as the experiments, I'm not a scientist. I'm an by education, I'm an engineer. Really, I'm more of a operator of complex things, whether it's aircraft or a spacecraft. But on the space station, everyone does the science. Interestingly enough, I found that the one experiment that I disliked the most training for, I actually liked the most in space, which was working with the rodents.
Oh,
We got
right.
mice board, and on Earth, I didn't like it because, you know, you're dissecting rodents, right? In space, and also I didn't like the smell of the formaldehyde. It gave me headaches.
Right.
But in space, I didn't experience the headaches as much. I'm not sure why. Maybe the formaldehyde didn't get in the air as much or dissipated more quickly. But I also liked the complexity of it and working and how challenging it was. And this was really good science we were doing on these rodents, and we really appreciate their sacrifice. Obviously, they don't have a choice in the matter, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I really liked doing that in space. And I also liked the experiments where you were more of the scientist making scientific observations than I did ones where you were just, throwing a switch. And the science varies from, things where you are doing exactly what a scientist would do to something like, we had this running joke on board with some of the crew members would be like, "Hey, what are you working on there?" And the other person would say, steps 3 through 7. You don't really know. Some of
Yeah.
the science is like flipping a switch. It's like, well, what's that box do? I don't know. Maybe it's making pancakes. Who knows?
Right.
And then there are science experiments that are on the outside of the space station that you have no interaction with, even some on the inside, no interaction with, never even heard of. So,
Yeah.
um, but I
It's a
found the
pretty
ones.
crowded space these days, right? There's a lot of equipment. It's a pretty crowded space in terms of the wall space and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I remember you giving a tour of your bedroom, the cabin. And one of the things that struck me was that it was quite a noisy environment. I do a lot of commercial air travel, and I've noticed, these days it takes me longer. When I get off a flight, my ears have a sort of ringing in them from that industrial noise that's there. Um, you talk often about your recovery physically, but did you have any sort of long-term issues that have resulted, from the long duration mission in particular?
Um, yeah, the space station is noisy. It's not as noisy as an airplane, like a commercial airliner. It's not that noisy. I would say I don't know, subjectively maybe like half as loud, but
Yep.
you can't ever escape it. When we launched, uh, as soon as we got on orbit, I quickly realized, and I said to Misha, we were still in the Soyuz. I said to Misha, our lives without noise for the next year has ended. I mean, we will always have this fan noise, pumps, motors going on in the background, humming of electrical equipment. Um, and now I forgot the other part of your question.
No, it's fine. No, just if that any of those things stayed with you in terms of long-term health
Oh yeah.
implications, things like that.
I had so you get a lot of radiation, and I had some gene expression changes, and genes are our DNA, RNA, protein. It's really the stuff that makes us who we are. And the expression is whether these are activated, deactivated, turned on, turned off. Not really sure what particular genes these were. I'm not sure we could even find out. Maybe I should ask. But that has not caused any noticeable symptoms. I don't
Yeah.
suffer from anything because of that. it seems like the only thing that I can kind of that is besides the training, like training for space flight in that spacesuit and that EMU can really do a job on your joints.
Mm.
I mean, I had shoulder surgery in June, but not if you don't count that kind of stuff that happens on the ground, just stuff that happens in space. I could probably point to my vision. You know, my twin brother Mark, who spent a lot less time in space, he doesn't need a distance correction, and I do. I can't see without any kind of distance correction. And you know, when you have that pressure in your head due to the lack of
Yep.
gravity, you're living in microgravity, all the fluid shifts. It seems like that fluid shift affects our vision. It causes folds in the choroid behind our retina. It can cause swelling of the optic nerve. So subjectively, I would, you know, because my brother doesn't have that, and I do have these like choroidal folds from my long duration flights, perhaps my vision was damaged as a result.
So you feel like you've got a stuffy head all the time because of the fluid retention, and when you came back, you talked about your legs, with fluid adjustment issues in those early days.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of stress from a bone density perspective and muscle perspective. You're fully recovered from the space
Yeah,
flight,
you
right?
know, I lost some bone mass. You know, and the important parts they say is like our hips and our heels. We've had two astronauts break their hips after long duration spaceflight.
Oh, really?
So you do a lot of exercise. Yeah, I lost 25% of my heart mass while I was
Oh,
in
wow.
space. Last mission. My wife Amiko says, "Good thing I started with a big heart."
There you go.
But
Yeah.
but that comes back after time. It makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Our heart's
Yeah.
pumping blood against the force of gravity right now to get to our brain. And when we're in space, it doesn't have to do that any longer. So it's a whole lot easier to, you know, oxygenate our organs so our, you know, cardiovascular system naturally gets deconditioned.
But I mean, we have at least, I mean, part of the reason for this mission was learning more about long duration space flight and its effect on the human body. But, you know, NASA and the space agencies have obviously developed, fairly um, uh, disciplined exercise regimes and so forth. You spend quite a bit of time of your day exercising, right? When you're up there?
Yeah, yeah, we exercise. You know, you do aerobic exercise anywhere from 30 minutes to I guess an hour. I don't know how you're feeling. Probably at least an hour of resistance exercise. You either do that 6 or 7 days a week. Seems like, you know, some people need that like mental health day off break from it versus doing it every day. I generally would do it 6 days a week. And you can feel the benefit of it. I mean, when the exercise equipment would break, after a couple of days, you really get anxious about it
Mm.
because you know just kind of feel your muscles just kind of atrophying almost
Yeah.
in real time.
So, you feel that helped you recover quicker when you got back, obviously?
Yeah, that's the idea. You know, to keep your heart from deconditioning more and keep your bones from whittling away. I guess to try to reduce that as much as you can.
So you were selected by NASA in 1996. But tell me about you've talked openly about reading the right stuff as a book and that being inspirational for you. But when you actually got into the ASCAN program, and you were selected, um, what is it about your previous experience as a test pilot that really helped you in those early days as an astronaut candidate?
Yeah, you know, the people that came from the flight test community clearly had an advantage over someone who was a scientist or an engineer, mostly because operating the space shuttle takes a similar kind of discipline as flying an airplane, especially in a flight test environment. I mean, you have to know the systems very, very well, but more importantly, have the kind of the methodology and the attention to detail that it takes to fly. I was an F-14 pilot, so it was a hard airplane to fly, and it took a lot of multitasking and
Especially carrier landings, apparently, huh?
carrier landings. Yeah. So you clearly have an advantage. And but NASA does a very good job of training people. So we've trained up people that have had no background in those kind of things to be like the flight engineer on the space shuttle. So the space shuttles, I think, without a doubt, for the rest of humanity, will be the most complicated and
Yeah.
challenging aerospace vehicle to fly ever. And it has to do with the fact that the current ones we're flying just don't do as much, right? They're capable,
Sure.
um, but they don't have they can't do the type of missions that the space shuttle could do, clearly. But now we live in this environment of robotics and automation. And, if we designed another vehicle from the ground up, regardless of how complicated or sophisticated the vehicle was, it would still be easier to fly, I think, than the space shuttle just because of those robotic and
Yeah.
AI.
Well, all the, the touchscreen display stuff now and the automation, it's obviously getting easier. Hey, listen, Scott, before we go to break, we like to do a little thing called the lightning round, just short, punchy answers where we like to ask you a few questions, get to know you a bit better. So I hope you don't mind, but here comes the lightning round. What was the first science fiction or space related media or TV you remember being exposed to?
Star Trek in when I was a kid in the 1960s. My two earliest memories, believe it or not, of a concrete like thing that happened or something that I saw is both the Apollo 11 moon landing and watching Star Trek. And my brother and I would sneak downstairs in the house we lived in and hide behind the couch and watch episodes of Star Trek. My mother thought it would be too scary for us, which she's
Ah, interesting.
right. Yeah, so yeah, that's
Especially
my
the Gorn
earliest.
episode, right?
Huh?
The Gorn episode was pretty scary for me as a
Yeah.
kid. I remember that. What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
The printing press.
Good choice. Yeah. Is there a particular individual, a scientist, a futurist, a entrepreneur, an engineer, a pilot that has influenced you in your life, and why?
Wow, never been asked that kind of question. Man, yeah, I have so much respect for all different kinds of scientists and engineers. Wow, but one that had particular influence as a or a pilot, huh?
Could be a group.
That's a tough question. I could make something up, but
No,
let
it's
me think
okay. No, I just well
about
think about it. If it comes to you, you can let me know.
it.
Um, you've talked about Star Trek, and if we're talking about space, we often will get into science fiction. Is there a science fiction story that's most representative of the sort of future that you hope for humanity?
Yeah. Let me go back to your previous question.
Sure.
You
No, that's fine.
but the guy's not really a scientist or an engineer or a pilot, but one of my big heroes and inspirations has been Ernest Shackleton.
All
The,
right.
you
Of
know,
course, yeah.
yeah, the polar Antarctic explorer, and not because of his successes, but because of his failures and how he handled them. I mean,
Yeah.
really an incredible leader, one of the greatest leaders of all time. So certainly him, I would say. And what was your other question?
No, is there a science fiction depiction of the future that is something that you hope for?
I used to read science fiction as a kid. I don't really read it anymore. Um, although, I don't really read much fiction anymore. Although I just started reading this book called Orbital, that's fiction about space flight and the space station. Someone recommended it. It's really very well written. Samantha something, I forget her,
I'll check it out.
is the
I'll check it
author,
out.
but
Have you ever thought about writing yourself?
I've written
I
most.
mean, I know you wrote Endurance, and
Yeah, like
but like writing sci-fi.
I have, I
You have?
have, I've thought about it.
Well, good.
That's
Well, no,
about it.
all right. All right, we'll call that. All right, well, let's take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm with Captain Scott Kelly, retired NASA astronaut. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm interviewing Scott Kelly this week. He spent 520 days in space. And are you still the longest duration US astronaut in terms of your number of days in space, Scott?
No, I'm probably number like total days. I might be like number 4 or 5.
Oh wow.
As far as a single mission, yeah, at one time I had the most total days, I think, and I had certainly the record for the longest single space flight. But since then, there have been two other guys that have flown longer, Mark Vandehei and then Frank Rubio, who he's the
Oh
only
yeah.
American that's actually spent more than a year in space on his only mission. Um, and what's fascinating about his flight is he thought he was only going to be up there for 4 months, like 4 or 5 months, and wound up staying well over a year, which was, my understanding is pretty challenging for him.
And there's a Russian cosmonaut that did over 700 days, isn't there? I think.
Oh, there's a couple of Russian cosmonauts that have over 1,000 total
Oh,
days. And then there was this Valery Palachuk, I think his name was, who spent 400 and something days at once on the Mir space station.
so we're talking about the potential of finally getting astronauts to Mars. It's been something that we've been talking about, obviously, since the 60s. The Saturn V was designed as potentially an interplanetary spacecraft back in the day. We're now working on, SpaceX is working on the Starship and other, there's other technologies at play here. But, one of the challenges we saw it just today with the two astronauts that returned from the space station today, or this week. We saw it with you on the steppes of Kazakhstan, I think it was, when you guys landed in the Soyuz capsule. You needed to be helped off the spacecraft, and yeah, okay, Mars is going to be lower gravity than the Earth, but my question obviously is not one just about surviving the mission to Mars in terms of the duration of that, because you've shown that we could do that. But how could you be functional as an astronaut when you landed on Mars? How are you going to be able to just walk out of the spacecraft unassisted, for example, and say those first words on the surface of Mars?
I think you would probably wait, a couple of days, maybe get acclimated. We've had people land before when there was no help on the Russian
Right.
Soyuz, so we've had astronauts land after a long duration spaceflight. Yuri Malenchenko, Peggy Whitson, and South Korean astronaut Su Young. But and they were able to get out of the spacecraft themselves. And yeah, you wouldn't be able to go run a marathon and
Right.
work really hard, but you'd be able to do enough. I think we understand the environment enough. We have appropriate, risk mitigation for the muscle loss, bone loss, vestibular things that you could probably pilot the vehicle to the surface. Most likely it would be autonomous anyway, and you'd just be monitoring. And then when you get there, you just take your time to adapt to the 1/3 gravity, which who knows, maybe we don't even need to really adapt to 1/3. Maybe there's kind of a get better cliff out there that at 1/3 it doesn't, you feel fine. Be interesting to find out. Be interesting to send somebody to the moon right after maybe
Yeah.
being in space for 6 months.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, see how they do.
1/6 Earth's
It looks like
gravity.
the moon
Yeah.
was put where it was so we could learn to go to Mars. I mean, if you consider it, it's like, 2 days away versus 200 days.
Yep.
It's got, a sixth of the Earth's gravity compared to a third. It has no atmosphere compared to a little bit of an atmosphere, almost nothing on Mars, but it's almost like it's designed just for us to practice to go to Mars. That's what
Hmm.
Moon is there for. So we're lucky to have it.
Yeah, I mean, it is uniquely positioned. The whole eclipse situation and so forth. It seems to be too perfect. It's also in relation to the size of the Earth, isn't it? It's the largest moon in terms of ratio, I think. For planets in the solar system. So, pretty unique. Um, yeah, let's talk about lunar missions coming up and settlements on the moon. We just had the first commercial success in terms of landing on the moon, and if when you were doing your training for your missions, obviously this has been a discussion point and long term planning goal for NASA for some time, but when you're working with other astronauts, do you talk about this stuff? Do you talk about missions to Moon and Mars, and do you compare notes? Do you talk about what you think it would be like as a team to be doing that stuff?
When I became an astronaut in 19, or when I joined NASA in 1996, I don't know what the definition of becoming an astronaut is. I think you have to fly in space, but yeah, so I got there in 1996, my astronaut class, and we actually put a little Mars on our class patch
Ah, right.
because we thought we were going to Mars.
Yeah,
I think many astronaut classes after that have learned that if you think you're going to Mars, you're probably not.
right.
So,
Yeah.
um, is it something we talk about? When I was there, and when I was at NASA, we were mostly focused on the space shuttle and the space station. We did have like an exploration branch of the office that looked, further uh, in out in time, but I was never really a part of that. Maybe in passing, you might talk about, oh, wouldn't that be cool to go to the moon or Mars? But when you know you're not the person and you're
Yeah.
focused on the space mission that is in front of you, it's not something you really talk about much, at least in my experience.
Now, the moon would be, like it theoretically at least we're going to have the potential to if there was a problem on the moon, we'd have backup spacecraft, and certainly with the way we're developing the tech in this place now, as we've seen with the recent case of rescuing the astronauts off the space station and so forth. That's going to be possible with Earth, but with Mars, you're a lot further away, and the duration of the mission is going to be much longer. So there's a lot more self-sufficiency. Obviously, the systems are getting better and they're getting more foolproof, fail-safe in respect to the tech that we're using. We're not using 1960s tech anymore. We've got better engineered, computing devices. We may even be using artificial intelligence, to assist us. Elon's talking about using robots as the first boots on Mars to test it for human rating.
3D
But
print.
yep, 3D printing of habitats and stuff like that using lunar soil mixed with polymers and things. There's all sorts of really interesting tech that we could do. And again, we could, I just saw one of the techs that they trialed on the Firefly mission was a running a charge through panels to take lunar dust off because like the lunar dust did crazy things to the Apollo astronaut spacesuits. When you look at them under microscopes and so forth.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that stuff. As you can tell, I'm geeking out. But if you start thinking about preparing for those longer term missions, what are some of the challenges that we haven't yet really got a solution for that we're going to have to solve before we can do this stuff safely, that you think?
Um, Well, there certainly are technical challenges out there, particularly with regard, like for a Mars mission, particularly the radiation environment. You're either going to have to fly through it really fast, or come up with a way to protect the crew, whether that's shielding or maybe magnetic field shielding that you might be able to get with with a with a propulsion system that generates a magnetic field, or maybe you just generate your own magnetic field independent of the propulsion. So that's an issue. That one of the main challenges right now. I think a lot of the other technology we got a pretty good handle on. My brother used to say, I don't know if he says this any longer, uh, but at least he used to say that going to Mars is not about rocket science, it's about political science,
Yeah.
because it's about getting the support. It's about people that believe in science, electing officials that likewise believe in science and engineering, that also believe there is value in going to Mars someday. I think there's a lot of great reasons for us to go to Mars. I think we should go to Mars. I hope to see us go to Mars. I think the idea that we need to go to Mars to save humanity is, for me, I don't quite understand that. Because this planet, regardless of what we do to it, will always be easier to live on than Mars that has no atmosphere, no liquid water. Um, so there are a lot of reasons, good reasons to go to Mars. I don't think saving humanity is one of them.
Yeah, I think it's more about human ambition as a species and exploration and expanding our consciousness. We're really not going to have an answer. We might get lucky with robotic spacecraft and find evidence of life in some form. But, if we're really going to have a clear thesis about how life is generated in the universe, we're going to have to get boots on the ground. I think that's it. We got the Europa Clipper mission coming up and things like that. There are places in our solar system where there's big potential for life, but there is a risk that the robots are going to get really, really good at this stuff, and you'll be able to have stereoscopic vision and be able to teleoperate robots on the surface and so forth. The argument may be, well, why risk humans? But I personally think that you take the challenge away from humanity, you take exploration away from humanity, you take these tests of our intelligence and endurance. To paraphrase, your book as well. You take these challenges away from humanity, and it's going to diminish us in some way. I feel like that the only way for humanity evolve and evolve our consciousness is sort of continually pushing the boundaries. But this is my personal view. I know other people are like, well, let's fix the problems on Earth, right? But
Yeah, there's a lot of problems on Earth that are a lot more important to solve than going to Mars. But still, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go to Mars someday. I
right.
think sending people, if at some point we decide not to do that, I think we've lost a part of our humanity, because
Yeah.
that that sense of exploration and trying to understand, what's over that hill, what's on the other side of the ocean, that part of us, that curiosity, is what helped us survive and thrive for so long. And I don't think we should ever lose that.
Yeah. You have talked about, seeing the earth and seeing conditions on the earth. You've talked about, one day waking up and being able to see China more clearly because they turned the factories off that day, and so forth. And I would make the same observation that this, fixing these problems is not a technological problem anymore. We can extract carbon from the atmosphere. We can shift to renewable energy sources. We can do all of that. It's either politics or economics. Why do 8 million people die every year from air pollution related disease? Because we're still making money out of the fossil fuel industry. This is not a technical problem to solve anymore. Homelessness. We could solve homelessness if we wanted. We could give everyone access to healthcare if we wanted. These are not technical problems. They're political and economic problems largely. So anyway, here ends the rant. So let's talk about what humanity is going to be like over the next 20 years. If we can if you can put your astronaut thinking cap on and give us a bit of a view of what the world of 2050 might be like in terms of space travel and what progress you think we might have made by then.
2050, 20 years, 25 years,
Yeah,
2050.
because we're
Well,
closer to 2050 today than we are the year 2000. So that's why I'm picking it.
well, I like to think that we will have gone to Mars by then and be closer to Mars. I would imagine we're going to have a pretty robust commercial access to space, maybe some commercial space stations. I think that will likely exist. Um, I'm not sure we're going to be at the point by 2050 where you could get in a spacecraft just as easily as you could get in an airplane and go on vacation. And I think that's going to take longer than that. But like commercial aviation, I mean, things change rapidly.
Yeah.
Orville and Wilbur flew the first airplane in 2000 or 1903, and
Yeah.
in September, I think, and then 66 years later, we
We're
have
on the moon.
people walking on the moon. So
Yeah.
stuff, technology can change at a rapid pace. The Industrial Revolution, computers to go from, the first
Yeah.
computer in 1940. Now we're on the cusp of general artificial intelligence, where
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to distinguish a AI from a person. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, we're
so
pretty close to that right now.
yeah,
AI is acing all the human cognitive tests that we throw at it.
yeah,
Um,
and then AI will also, once it gets there, will, or even now, really, I mean, it can solve a lot of problems that it would take people much, much longer to solve, or maybe never even solve. Especially if it accesses a lot of data. So
well, you can imagine problem solving with AI could be easier, in a space settlement, right? Just asking the AI and having that
yeah,
knowledge base and being able to access that information very quickly, even quicker than you could get the answer from mission control. That could
yeah.
be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah.
AI for space, how that would work, but you would have to, the AI would have to be resident in the spacecraft. Otherwise, it would have the same time delay as
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
communication
you
system.
wouldn't have it in the cloud, but you could have low latency satellite systems. We got that, but we are seeing compression, in terms of these reasoning models and stuff like that. So it's very possible that we could have spacecraft with small supercomputers on them, even with quantum computing
Oh
now
my
making
God, yeah.
progress. Yeah.
Well, quantum
And what about
physics.
propulsion? Could we get to the moon faster? Do you think in 25 years?
Well, with you mean the Mars faster?
Yeah, sorry, to Mars. Yeah.
Yeah, propulsion. I'm not a big expert on propulsion systems in that going to Mars kind of way. Certainly you could always, you know, put more fuel and bigger engines on something and make it go faster, right? I think that's one of the ways you get to Mars is just by getting there really, really fast and then avoid the radiation. Perhaps
Yeah.
nuclear propulsion. I mean,
Yeah.
nuclear is kind of making a little bit of a comeback. I
Yeah.
think, for power generation on Earth, but also in space, there may be applications. Obviously people are scared of it, but I think there are
Yeah,
ways
but I
to make.
think we conflated nuclear weapons with nuclear energy, and that's part of the problem. We've got tokamak fusion reactors, and we've got thorium reactors, stuff like that, much cleaner.
Mhm.
Of course, NASA's used RTGs, even in the Voyager aircraft, they're still going,
Yeah.
although obviously limited capabilities now, but off that type of nuclear power source. And of course, Mark Watney used it to heat himself up on Mars. So there you go. There you have it. So, So listen, we're running out of time, Scott, but you know, if you were in the process of wanting to become an astronaut today to prepare for this world of the future, living on the moon, spending time on the moon and Mars, you know, how would you go about that process today, given, you know, the aspirations you had as a young man, you know, coming out of college and wanting to be an astronaut?
I my experience was strictly at NASA. There are other ways to become an astronaut. I mean, you could work for Axiom Space as an example, although, or you could, be part of one of their missions through another country, or maybe eventually a company
Or you
might
could just be a
sponsor.
billionaire, right?
You could be a billionaire and, pay your own way, which I have no problem with, by the way. I think that's helped bring the cost down over time, make it more accessible to people that aren't billionaires. Um, but for me and for NASA, and I think this probably applies, broadly to other country space agencies and commercial space as well. I would say choose a field um, that is technical because most people that are going to be crew members in space are going to need some technical skills, whether that's science, engineering, flying airplanes, operating stuff that is incredibly challenging. Um, but then choose something you like, because if you like it, you're going to do better at it. If you don't like
Yeah.
it and you're just becoming a pilot because you watched the Futurists and you saw me on here and you're like, oh, that guy was an astronaut, he was a pilot, I'm going to become a pilot in the Navy, I'm going to become an astronaut. I wouldn't recommend that.
It's just hard
You're
work.
going to choose something you like, you're going to do better at it. Also, look for opportunities to work as part of a team, because that's one of the biggest aspects of working in space is you're part of a crew and a team. Maybe your job doesn't provide that opportunity. Maybe your job doesn't provide the opportunity to work in a stressful, challenging environment where there's risk, and that risk is even physical risk. Maybe your job doesn't do that. Maybe you work in a lab, but you can do other things to demonstrate that you're good in those particular areas. Work on your leadership skills. Spaceflight needs followers. It also needs leaders. Yeah, and then understand that other people have gotten these jobs that didn't consider themselves qualified. You're talking to one of them right now, and then never give up. I mean, we've had people that have applied to be astronauts, I don't know, 15 times. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine doing that.
Yeah.
It drive me crazy. I only applied
How
for
many times did you? Oh, you applied once. I was going to
one
ask.
time.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
brother applied twice.
Oh, really? Oh, there you go. Do you hold that over him? What's next for you then? I mean, you know, we might have longevity signs and stuff like that. You could end up going to the Mars. You know, John Glenn went up when he was 70, right? So, but
Yeah.
you know, what's next for you, Scott? What's on the horizon for you? What inspires you today?
I definitely don't want to die on Mars. I would go to Mars if I knew I could have a fairly decent chance of coming back. I don't know what that is. Maybe 51%.
I mean,
But
I do like Elon's quote in that respect. He says he wants to die on Mars, just not on impact. I thought that was pretty clever. But
yeah, having spent a year in a confined environment with recycled air and
yeah,
no weather, I don't know. Going to Mars would be cool. Spending the rest of your life on Mars,
yeah,
unless it was like, the Total Recall Mars, that
yeah,
Arnold
yeah,
Schwarzenegger
yeah.
movie. I don't know.
I go for a couple of years though. You know,
Yeah.
if that was on offer. But what's next for you? What do you think?
I do a bunch of different things. I do some public speaking. I do some writing. I talk about space on TV sometimes. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. But I do some company board stuff. I'm really, though, interested in the future with regards to artificial intelligence and robotics. I don't work in the field, but it's something that really fascinates me. I think we are on the cusp of a revolution in
Mm,
technology. Many people don't even understand how
I
rapidly
agree.
it's going to change.
Absolutely agree. Well, listen, if I'll keep a lookout for you. But if you want to speak at our Futurist event in Dubai coming up in September, you're more than welcome to get an invite. But it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. Fascinating. I want to thank you for your service. I know it's a much used trope, but to sacrifice the time with your family and potentially risk your health for the advancement of humanity is, I think, one of the greatest calling that anyone can have, and I applaud you for your work in that. And it's been wonderful to have you on the show. I really appreciate you giving us some of your time. And how can people follow what you're doing and keep up with the work you're doing around the globe?
I had some social media accounts. Some of them I post on, some of them I don't much anymore because some of that stuff obviously turned into a hellscape of hate and disinformation. But hey, I'm a fan. Appreciate you having me on, Brett.
No, appreciate it, bro.
Come to your conference. Let me know.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, we'll work on that. We'll work on that offline. But Scott Kelly, thanks for being on the Futurists.
All right. Thanks.
That's a wrap. All right, guys. Well, you know how it ends this time of the show. We like to thank the team for their work on putting the Futurist together. But you know that we will see you in the future.